My name is Patrick Prominski. I teach in the English department. I don't see any former students here, but if you have had me, you know what I'm all about. Today we are talking about Who Cares Why Bother. This is the theme of the entire program. As you guys probably know, I do want to point out that there's one session after this one. There's a student writing success stories. It is in this room, so if you have to attend 2 sessions, you can always just hang around after this. But what we're here for today is I put together a very small panel of a couple of my former students to talk about writing. And the reason that I did that was because, well, instructors like me and my colleagues, we all feel very passionately about writing. Sometimes students don't, or they don't understand why they need to take this series of 2 classes, 101 and 102, and it doesn't make any sense. So I thought, rather than have me stand up here and talk, I would talk to a couple of my former students who I've had in multiple classes, and so I know about their writing experience a little bit, about their writing journey, and I've seen them both grow as writers over the last couple of semesters, year and a half or so. And so that's what we're gonna do. What I've got on my sheet is just a series of questions. I've got about a half dozen to 10 questions that I'm going to pose to each of these 2 students here. And they're going to give you the answers and what they have for answers. And my hope is that by the end, you have maybe a better sense of why we should keep doing this, why we should keep teaching 101 and 102, why you should keep taking 101 and 102, and what you can take from those classes. Because the skills, again, this is me as an instructor speaking, but those skills I feel are very, very valuable. And yeah, I guess just to say it again, rather than me tell you why I think they're valuable, I've enlisted a couple of my students to do that. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Lydia and Stephen. I'm going to let them do a brief introduction of themselves, talk about themselves and about their writing, and we'll proceed from there. At the end, there'll be a moment or 10 or so for some questions and answers, and you should feel free to ask them or me anything about what they've said or what I've said as part of this panel today. So Stephen, would you mind starting, and then Lydia? I just want you to take a few minutes each to introduce yourselves, like I said, and talk about your writing background, where you came from before GRCC, the classes you've taken here, perhaps, that kind of thing. All right? Please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephen Duchnowski. I kind of always written. And a number of years ago, I actually started going to college at Western in Kalamazoo. And there was a lot of internal anxiety about going to school and about doing my own life by myself. And I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't cope with the class structure, and I couldn't cope with forcing myself to write at the time. And I always believed that you were supposed to kind of let it happen naturally and let it build up and spew out. And ever since I started going to GRCC with Patrick Prominski here and Marianne Lesser for my creative writing class, they both taught me that, without even really saying the direct words, that I can force myself to write. And for classes, you need to write essays, you need to write stories, and they really gave me the inspiration to kind of spit it all out and create profound words of my own. So I've been going here for about a year now, and I've been loving every minute of it. So that's me. Lydia?
Thank you, Stephen. Hi, everyone. I am Lydia Herron. I've been going to GRCC since this past summer, so I think this is my 3rd semester here. And every semester I've actually taken a class with Dr. Prominski, so he's kind of been a constant factor in my experience here. Before GRCC, I actually grew up on the east side of the state over in Genesee County, and I attended my 101 class at Mott Community College, and that was actually my first experience in a actual school environment, because I was homeschooled since I was pretty much a baby in essence. But so being in a structured environment like college was very challenging to me, And my teacher there, Mrs. Calling, was extraordinary in that she encouraged me to actually write for myself, because I'd never written for myself before. Every time I'd written, it was more or less just a necessary evil to get through class. It was not for pleasure, and she taught me that I had something that I could actually say for myself. It wasn't someone else speaking through me, which was very a big breaking through moment in my writing. So when I moved out here with my roommate to attend college at GRCC, I was prepared to I'd already been preparing the ground for learning and wanting to extend that. And I was very fortunate to take Dr. Prominski's 102 class, because it was just happenstance. I actually applied for his 102 and his humanities at the same time for different semesters, but I didn't know they were the same person. So it was kind of amusing. But it was very, very helpful because, so that's about it.
So I guess I should take a minute to just say I did not recruit these two to talk about how often they've taken me as an instructor. Thank you, but that's not why. But what strikes me, and the reason that I actually asked you both up here, is because their experience is not uncommon, right? You've gone to a different college, maybe you struggled some, or you found writing to be just a real, I don't know how to say this nicely, but a bore, right? Something that you had to do for class, that you got the assignment and you did it, and that's how you felt about writing, all right? And because that's so many students' experience, and I'm going to be totally honest too, in undergrad it was my experience as well, that it was just an assignment. It's that reason that I asked these two, Stephen and Lydia, here today to kind of talk about it. And so I think what's probably the most helpful is to kind of talk a little bit about their background here at GRCC, the kinds of work that they've done, successes, failures. I call them challenges, but failures, and just their process when it comes to writing, both when they started here, which is probably yours and mine. I've got an assignment, it's due Friday, I better start it Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, depending on when it's due, versus now, all right? So I think let's go right there and start with this question here, which is just each take a few minutes to talk about your writing process when you get an assignment. Well, think back to those early days. I know it's only been a year, but think back to those early days and to now. What did you like most then? Probably getting it done. But what do you like most now, and what do you like least about writing and working through an assignment? And Stephen, I guess you're holding the microphone. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Well, what I like the most about getting an assignment is generally you get it pretty early on. So it gives me a lot of time to process my thoughts and process my topic and expand on my topic. And not only do I like to write just specifically on a topic, it always takes me a very, very long time to find the direct angle on why I'm writing what I'm writing and why I personally care about it. And that helps me a lot through my process, because it's not only just an assignment, it's something I actually care about. And that's what it turns into. And I've written essays for Dr. Prominski, and the end product is something I've never thought would happen. My final for 101 that I wrote for him was based on the topic of how millennials are changing the American dream. And I started writing, and I wasn't sure where it was going. I had some basic ideas, and it all sort of expanded on itself naturally, and through a lot of thought and a lot of contemplation. And that's something beautiful, and that's something I would never. I'm really grateful that I had those experiences. But personal struggles, because I've dealt with a lot of debilitating anxiety over the past 15 or 20 years. That's been my biggest struggle, is starting to write, and I'm actually a huge procrastinator. I generally don't. I have to force it out, so I can't generally start writing until I have to start writing, and that's my biggest struggle, is trying to write it all at once. And that's not really the most helpful for anyone, but that's my biggest struggle, is trying to like mediate my time and my time management and starting to write a week or two before it's due. But it all just kind of compiles in my head over time, and then all just kind of spews out at the end. And sometimes I've been really like happy about the outcome, and sometimes I know I could have done better. Let's just put it that way. But I found that writing initially, like whether I force it or whether it comes naturally, it really helped me grow, and it really helped me overcome those anxieties. And like no matter what I'm writing, if it's for school or personally, that's where I've always focused, is through words. And that's really the only thing I have control over, and that's what I decided. And through my journey of writing, I've noticed I changed quite drastically, and I'm more confident in myself, and I've been able to overcome things I never really thought I could overcome before. So, so I don't know, I'm just really stoked. Here you go.
Thank you. I think I'll kind of do the reverse, in the sense that I discovered a challenge here more than anything. I've always had a difficult time to formulate my thoughts in a cohesive manner. What brings to mind is my 102 project. My final project for 102 is an argument. Well, it wasn't the final project. It was my big main paper. It was an argumentative paper, and I was supposed to convince someone of something. And I did not really convince anyone of anything. It was more just, okay, there's a problem, and here's maybe a solution, maybe, if you're interested in that kind of thing. But it was it was not very diplomatic at all. It's just kind of there. And approaching from there, at that point of writing, I realized how much I actually had opinions when I was forced to give one, which, I mean, if you knew me, I'm not an opinionated person necessarily, in the sense of if a stranger walked up to me in the street and asked me my opinion, I probably wouldn't want to give it until I knew all the facets surrounding it, and I could take it apart and wonder what the poetic implication of them asking me the question was. But coming from that point, and then I started taking humanities as the next semester of this past summer, and that's where I really started figuring out what I believed, what I wanted to say about what I believed, how it implicated my writing, and that I've been writing since I was a child, and being able to express myself confidently, like Stephen was saying, it was a big confidence boost for me. Even the fact that I kind of failed my argument, in the sense it was a good attempt, but it wasn't productive, I was able to take from that what I needed to figure out exactly what I was arguing for. So I think that's my biggest success so far, is being able to say, yes, I have an opinion, and this is why you should believe it too, ish, maybe. Okay. Maybe not.
No, that's fine.
That's perfect.
Did you want to add something, Steve?
No.
No? Okay. So I think that's, Lydia, thank you. That's a spot that I want to stop at, because too often as students, and even from my standpoint as an instructor, you feel like you get an assignment, right? And you may feel some of the things that Stephen and Lydia feel when they've gotten assignments, but you also feel like the argument has to be airtight, and that it has to be perfect, and that it has to be successful. And one of the things that I've told all of my classes, and Stephen and Lydia can probably attest to this, is that, you know, sometimes we make an argument and it fails. The argument just doesn't work for whatever reason. Either, you know, you've chosen some not great research, or your position is just, it's not balanced enough, or it doesn't go far enough. There are lots of reasons an argument can fail. And in those instances, I tell my students that, you know, your argument failed, but your paper didn't necessarily fail. The way that we learn is by not doing things correctly, by failing. And that F word is dirty from a student perspective. You don't want to fail. So be confident that you can have an unsuccessful argument and still learn something from it. That's how we make our arguments stronger. That's how I make my arguments stronger, and that's how I've seen both of these individuals make their arguments stronger. And two, just keep in mind too, and I'm probably skipping ahead a little bit to the end, which we've a ways off yet, but you know, the ideas of personal growth and confidence and formulating thoughts, these are some of the things that writing can do for you that you might not necessarily be thinking about when you're looking at that syllabus for 101 and 102. And you know, I want to revisit a couple of things. You sort of talked about successes and failures, and if you've already touched on them, that's fine, I suppose. But talk about like one success that you've had here. I've got a couple in mind for each of you, but what are your successes, and what did you not do so well at during your writing process?
Well, I could probably say my biggest success was definitely my creative writing final was daunting. It was I had to write, it was I think a 20, 25, 30, I can't remember exactly, it was like a year ago, but I think it was like a 20 to 30 page final of a collaboration of short story works and poetry. And it was pretty much trying to compile all of my best work I've ever written within that time frame, and trying to come up with more pages last minute because I didn't have enough I was proud of. That was critical. And I have a big problem when it comes to what he was mentioning, failure. And I believe, and I have an issue writing anything that's not gonna be profound. Like at the towards the end of anything I write, it always has to be grand to my own self in some way. And I have an issue writing, turning in subpar work, which I have countless times, and I've always kicked myself in the foot for it. And that's like the most critical thing that I'm the most critical on myself, because I know when I could have tried harder. And I guess it's just, once again, like time management and like letting it be okay, not necessarily to turn in subpar work, but letting it be okay to turn in something I'm not the most proud of because it could have been better, because I learned from my mistakes from not giving myself enough time to do it, or by like even through the writing process, like when you're creating an essay, you have to have like your topic, and then you have all of your subcategories on like why that topic is important, and like what your criteria is on why that topic is so important. And that really helped grow the full idea in my own head. So it's like, yeah, I really like changing the world. Like I really like changing the world. That's just who I am. And like for my big essay I wrote for him, I'm really proud of, about how millennials changed the American dream. I wasn't really sure where that was going, and through the writing process and really getting down to the bottom of why I believed that, it gave me time to just sit down and write and to think about it. And that's the way I think, is through writing. So it's like it gave me time to just to write and like get through all of the major holes and issues, and just to expand on my own ideas. So as far as failures go along, it's just not being too critical on yourself, because that's what I do every day. So Lydia.
Thank you. I think perhaps the most successful piece of work that I've produced here is, I think it's going to be the first thing I actually wrote for 102, which was my personal narrative story. And it's just supposed to be an essay. This is my first class, first class here, and I was not expecting to give him anything worth anything. I wasn't expecting it to be anything worth talking about. I did not feel like I had anything to talk about in my life. I couldn't think of any example, and the only things I had were not good things that I was ready to talk about. So I had a lot of I had a lot of baggage that I didn't want to talk about in class, especially because we'd have to have peer review, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing this. I literally yelled at my computer, I'm not doing this. And then it was actually in class. It was a late class at 6:30 as we were in our little writing thing. And I just had this moment of remembering back when I was a kid and standing at our little screen door, and we had this huge bush in front of our house that my mother hated. And it was one of those really fragrant, soft fern bushes. I'm not sure if anyone knows what I'm talking about, but it's a huge, if you don't let it grow, most people let it grow and it's like yay tall, it's tiny. But this one was taller than my father and is like 7 foot tall. It's huge. You could see it for a mile. And my mother hated it, but we kids loved it. And I remember swinging in the branches with all of my brothers. I had 6 siblings, so I had at least 3 or 4 siblings in this bush at any point in time. And I just had that picture in my head of me with my little brother getting to try the bush for the very first time. And so I decided to pick that moment to talk about my whole experience as a child and growing up, and when my parents finally got rid of the bush and what that felt like for all of us. Even though we were too big and too old to play in the bush anymore, it actually, if you talk to any of my siblings and you talk about the bush, every single one has a memory in it with one of us involved. And it's kind of a special, almost like a secret language of our family. And being able to share that and write about it was, again, another breakthrough moment for me, because I had never thought about the bush like that before. It was the bush, it's gone now, it's dead. That there's a pretty porch on top now. I mean, who remembers the bush now? But then I got talking to my siblings and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that. Do you remember making hats out of the leaves? And we had an amazing, so yeah, I think that would be a good example of what I found to be helpful and successful in my writing here. So
I have a story. I have another story. It was actually the first time I went to GRCC. Patrick Prominski was one of my first instructors during that time, and it was for English 101, and he gave us the topic of writing a personal narrative, telling a story about something that happened in your life and how you overcame it, and how, and just telling a story to kind of see where you were, I think it was kind of a test to kind of see where people were with their own writing. And I ended up writing a story I had no idea I needed to tell. And it was a story of like my childhood and how I grew up, and how like I was living in a van with my mother, and and how we were like homeless, just kind of going through the streets, and about my perceptions during those moments of the world around me. And I had absolutely no idea that story needed to come out. And it was like blocked away in my memory for the longest time, and as if I like had just completely forgotten about it. And I've had a lot of those moments kind of come back in my own head, like recently, a lot of old memories that I completely forgot about. And getting an assignment like that forces you to critically think about your own life and things that happen to you and things that matter, even if you don't think they do. Like, I've had a lot of moments in my life where I'm like, well, I don't really feel like I've done much. But then if you like really narrow it down to the raw moments of what happens, like the small things really matter. And the small things are what makes a good piece of work. And the small things, those small moments, like a day or an hour or like a conversation, those are the things that matter, and those are the things you should write about. And I actually ended up turning it in. And he's like, Steven, you took a really creative approach on this. And I'm like, that's the only way I really know how to do it. And then I ended up kind of reformulating it a little bit. And it actually turned into my first short story I wrote in 7 years. So that was a really big like accomplishment for me. And then I submitted it to it was the English department, had like a competition, and it won. I got a place in it, and that was a really proud moment for me, that like something I wrote that I didn't really have any idea of what I was writing turned into a piece of work that I can be proud of, and it let me talk about my story. So
yeah, and I think I should probably talk about that assignment, because you each did it in a separate class, a 101 and a 102. And it's a really low stakes assignment that I have students do, and I call it exploding a moment, where you pick like this very tiny little thing and you take it apart to see what's there. And partly, you guys are right. The reason that I do it is to see where all my students are, because I rarely know them from semester to semester. But partly, too, I do it to show that each of these little moments has an entire story behind it. And that applies not only to our personal lives, but when we're looking at, creating arguments. Arguments have so many little pieces, and you can choose any one of those little pieces, and you can explode it, right? You can take it apart, and you can really get into the tiny bits of it. And when we do that, we realize just how complicated arguments can be. And so students who feel like, oh, I've written 3 pages, how am I going to get to 7, 8, or 10 pages? You can explode a moment. And chances are there's a moment in there that you can take apart. And that one little seed can be enough for an entire paper, or if you choose to go on, a 20-page paper or a book even. And so that's why I give that assignment. We don't always write personal essays in my classes, but it's a great starter essay, and it really does show the potential behind ideas. I think I want to ask you guys, though, too, both, and you've touched on this a little bit, but you started out, both of you, kind of as writers who could write but didn't really like to do it. Maybe were reluctant, especially in an academic setting, which again is where so many students are. And now that you're leaving sort of the writing program, I want to ask you both, like, what is the most valuable tool you've taken? And I think, how do you see your experience as a writer at GRCC going into whatever it is you want to ultimately go into? So the tool you've taken, and then how you see this experience applying, because you're probably not just going to take writing classes forever. Very few people actually do that. So whoever wants to go first on that one.
Tool you've taken, what do you mean?
Pay attention to my class, David. No, what skill? I use the word tool, but what skill have you taken? It can be specific to writing or just about the process or anything like that.
Well, I learned a lot about myself throughout the past year of just being in the English department and like taking classes and like how I write. And like I talked a little bit about this, but it's like before I used to feel like the inspiration would come to me, I would write when I needed to write. And what I really learned the most is my actual process. And I found out that I can't, like, it all kind of builds up and spews out, and I really need to force myself to get it out, otherwise it won't. And so I guess coming from GRCC and like going out into the world, like I've become a lot more confident in my own abilities and my own thoughts, and it showed me kind of how to interact with others and like formulate my own opinions and really have an argument with someone that actually makes a difference. And I feel like I'll actually be able to actually make a difference and like somewhere else, not just in class, but somewhere else in the world. And because I've become more confident in my ideas and my thoughts. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit?
Okay. Well, I'm not leaving the writing department quite yet.
None of us are.
But so far, I think the most useful tool and skill set I've been able to exercise has probably been the same thing as he said. It's been able to formulate and to figure out how I speak as a person and as a writer, because I have this history of writers in my family, but they have a very specific, I didn't really touch on that too much, but they have a very specific worldview. And I'm not saying I disagree with that worldview at all. However, I was always kind of forced to only ever write in accordance with that ideology and belief, whereas I have other stories to tell, other things to discuss, other concerns to bring to the table. And going into the next semester of my education, wherever that may be, I'm eager to build on that. And I hope that you don't approach writing in the sense that it has to be perfect, because I think we've both kind of clarified that it is not perfect at all. And I always say that it's a matter of growing. That's how I always felt my writing is. I write something, and then a week later, I look at it, and it's different, and I have to make it different, and then it's something new. And I used to call it my garden of writing. I was very poetic as a teenager. And so that's kind of my process is I look at it, I write it out, I just kind of spew everything forward, and then I tend it, I take care of it, I add to it, I take away. And eventually, maybe it's a mess at the end, but it could be a good mess.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what I got.
Something else I want to talk about is editing. I feel like oftentimes, like people, I've done this myself, you just kind of write the paper from beginning to end, and then you have your introduction, and you have your body, then you have your conclusion, then you say, that's it. I'm done with the assignment, that's fine. But I'd really encourage everyone, because I've learned a lot about myself, not even just in writing, but a lot about myself as a person through editing and like taking apart all of your sentences and realizing why you use those words and like what's important about those bodies and expanding on those bodies. So like instead of just writing from beginning to end, we can all sort of edit our own thoughts and find the meaning behind them. And that's just pretty much editing. Editing is very important. I learned a lot about myself through that process and like why I believe the things I believe. So I just wanted to talk about editing for a second.
Yeah, thank you. So while we're thinking about editing and some of the things that you've taken, we have a number of students here and at the college who maybe don't know or what they're supposed to get out of the classes, or maybe don't know how to get through these classes, right? They're reluctant writers, or they don't feel like they're very good. That's a complaint that I hear from writers all the time, that I'm not a very good writer. And I always tell them, yeah, you are. You just don't know it yet. You have to figure it out for yourself. We have to get you there. So for those people who maybe are struggling a little bit, do you have any advice for them, or what advice would you give them for getting through the classes? And just, be as honest as you feel like.
Last semester for summer, it was, I guess, fall, and now it's winter, but during the summer, I took 102 with him, and it was the worst time of my life academically. It was an entire semester cut down into 7 weeks of very, very intricate, personal, I felt a lot of pressure for every essay, because it was like you had to write an essay every week, I think, right? Or every other week or something. And coming from my background, wanting to make everything perfect and grand and profound, like I didn't really feel like I had what it take to just, I didn't really feel like I had what it took to just write the essays and come up with ideas. And I struggled a lot, and he knew I struggled a lot, and he was really good about, kind of helping me guiding me through it. But my advice, talk to your professors. They can help you through a lot, and just don't be too hard on yourself. Take your time. Because I felt more often than not that I was a terrible writer. And I know that's not true, because everyone's told me throughout my whole life that like I am a good writer and that I can do things, but I feel like everyone is a good writer. And I feel like that's the best thing about writing, is that it's like the most honest thing that anyone can do. And there is no standard behind it. There's standard behind like essays and like certain like academic writing, but there's really not a standard behind writing as a whole, and everyone has the capacity to do it, and everyone has their own story to tell. And so just don't be too hard on yourself, and just put words down. Come up with your ideas, just put your words down, and talk to your professors.
Agreed.
Okay.
Excuse me. I honestly don't think I'm in a place to give advice to writers. But if I did say anything because I kind of think of, it sounds selfish, but I think of myself sitting in the 102 class in 101 and being that first blush, okay, this is what college is like. because that's pretty much what it is to a lot of kids, especially. But I remember sitting in my 101 class and thinking, I didn't talk to a single person in my class. I actually made a joke about Valentine's Day with someone. I had a pencil, and I wrote, I was led to you, and I left it on her desk just because I wanted to make her laugh, because she was having a really rough time with her boyfriend or whatever, and I just wanted to make her laugh. And I was like, I was led to you, and you were drawn to me underneath, and I had like a little doodle. And everyone was trying to figure out who did it. But that was the extent of my communication with anyone in the class. And in 102, it was kind of similar, but I was blessed to have a good table of people who actually talked to me, or at me at least. And I was able to kind of get a good sense of my classmates. And that's another thing. I think don't be afraid to talk to them. I still am. I still am. It's hard to talk to these two even. But at the same time, I think don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you know the person's a strength in an area. I was lucky to be in his group in 102. And it was really interesting to just observe. I don't even think I said anything much. I was just observing him talk and communicate with other people, and other people in my class that were decent writers, and we all had this really good vibe going. I hate using that word, but I don't know what else to use right at this moment. But I think that's the big thing. Don't be afraid to talk to your professors, especially even if they seem distant. I've had that problem too, where it seems like the professor couldn't care less if you showed up. They do. They care, and they notice. And even if it's just one email to tell them, hey, I'm going to be late, that's way more than they get half the time. And I wish that could be changed. And let's pull a Stephen Duchnowski and change the world of how people communicate with their professors. But that's all I got.
Also, I wanted to expand on what she was talking about with like talking to your classmates, because you honestly, like right now in college, like we're all kind of growing together, and we're all kind of like in this journey of life or whatever. But your peers now are going to be your peers later, and no matter where you are in the world, like you might run into them, you might see them, something might happen. If you get to know them now, like you never know how they can help you and network in the future. And like you never know where people are going to end up. So it's always good to expand on your horizons and just communicate with everyone in your class and get to know them and know their strengths and their weaknesses, and see where they're going, because communication and just getting to know other people and like spreading the love or whatever, like that can really help your own life in the future too, because it's all the same network, it's all the same peers. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second.
All right. So I think what we did here today, or at least what I hope we did here, I have a feeling we need to stand up again, so I'm going to,
Stand up.
is get some advice about writing and some experience about writing from actual writers. Not that instructors, we write all the time, but relating to people that sometimes it's easier for people you recognize, right? And what I hope you took today was that this kind of experience is valuable, that you can get through it. Even if you think you're not a great writer, you are. You just have to find the story to tell. And within those classes, you can meet people. You can think about changing the world, right? You can find new ways to express yourself. And those are things that you can take with you. And one of the final things that I tell my students is, sometimes I feel like when they leave the class, they don't realize what they've learned. At the end of a math class, and I'm not bashing math, but at the end of a math class, you take a test, and if you answer the questions, you can do math, right? You know what you've done. But at the end of a writing semester, you turn in a final paper, and maybe you do well on it, but maybe you're still not even quite sure what you did. And I tell my students that you may not realize what you've done until 3, 4, 5, 10 years later, when you're sitting down to write something, and it hits you that you're using something that you learned, 5 years earlier. You're making an argument, you're exploding a moment, you're doing whatever it is that you need to do. And so for me, that's what I tell them that they're going to take, or that's what I hope that they're going to take. And it was great to talk to Stephen and Lydia today to find out what they took from the class. And I hope that you found it valuable. This is the first time I've done this kind of panel. If they'll have me back, I'd like to do it again with different students next year. Not that I don't love you guys, but, different different students next year. And what I'd like to do now, too, is ask you if you have any questions for either Stephen or Lydia. I guess you could ask me, although I think they're more interesting than I am. And so if you have any questions, let me know. I'll bring the mic to you. You can ask them, and hopefully they can answer. No, nothing at all. All right. Well, that's fair. It is 2:45 anyway, and we used up our time. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you, Stephen and Lydia, for showing up and talking today. And I hope you guys all have a great afternoon. I hope we don't have any more snow days. And be careful if you're driving out there. It's supposed to get cold tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.